I want to begin by thanking profusely the organizers of this conference for allowing me to be here. I have very much enjoyed and learned from the discussions. From the beginning with the address of Samir Amin, and again I want to agree with Mr. Aditya on the technological. It was very impressive, the way that address was presented. But from that address until almost now, I have not heard something which I consider very significant in the last 10 years, maybe less. I have not heard that taken into consideration, and that is the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, which is attempting to redraw boundaries and introduce, well, the whole business about nativism and modernity and all these issues come up with the upsurge of Islamic fundamentalism, not only in the Middle East, but also in Africa, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, everywhere. This is the issue of the moment, or one of the issues of the moment. And I have not heard that that event accounted for in the presentation either by Dr. Amin or any of the speakers who come from regions of the world where this fundamentalism and the aggression that is involved and the role of religious commitment, that is not accounted for at all in the paradigms that have been dealt with so far.
Thank you for giving me some opportunity to speak about my impression about the conference. I'm from Okinawa University. Okinawa is the islands, chain of arc of islands between Japan archipelago and Taiwan. And I have 2 words which I'm so impressed during the conference. One is solitude, which Dr. Bissio submitted. And the other one is echo, that Dr. Lewis, in the title of Dr. Lewis. And solitude and echo is the words I haven't expected before I came here. But when we think about abandon spirit, 60 years after and today, we think about abandon and why we have to use these words, solitude or echo. And this is, and abandon, actually abandon still sounds so important for people of Okinawa. In 1955, people started land struggle, protesting against US military occupation. It's a year of March of the Beggars. protesting U.S. occupation. People saying like, we are beggars. But who make us beggars? That's a beginning. And this movement is inspired by Indian salt satyagraha, salt march during the anti-colonial movement. So Bandung in 1955, I looked into the newspaper before I came here, and so many articles about Bandung. And people cannot go anywhere, get out of islands. People couldn't get out of islands at that time because population control by US and territory control. So people imagine the world through the newspaper, small articles. But so many news, and all the articles are translated by the New York Times or American newspaper. So some articles are criticized the Bandung very badly. But people imagine Bandung as the image of the post-war peace and solidarity. And it's encouraged those articles, even if it criticizes Bandung, that encourage people to stand up against military occupation. So before I came here, Bandung and Third World, maybe I can study, maybe, you know, of course I studied many hopeful visions here, but at the same time I heard echo or solitude. So I'm so impressed, and I appreciate that all the presentations. And how can I say? And about Islamic fundamentalism that she mentioned, then I think about the military presence in the Third World, Asia, Africa, and then maybe African Command, AFRICOM, start operation in African continent. And Okinawan people protesting military base, not for themselves, not only for themselves. Of course, they want the land get back their own hands, but at the same time, they want to contribute to world peace through their own struggle. So solidarity means, how can I say? It's not a cooperation. I mean, how can I say? Contribute to give their own life, their own spirit to the world. So, so Bandung image or Third World image is like, how can I say? I cannot explain, but still living, still alive in the struggle. So before I came here, I say people like, I'm going to the conference in China about Bandung and Third World. Wow! Many people so excited. So still discussion is alive. So let's say.
我想提的问题其实跟这个知识生产有关系，也就是说，我们不管是考虑这个 Inter-Asia 这个亚际之间也好，考虑第三世界也好，考虑现在的这个新万隆也好，那这个知识生产，它的这个如何能够带动它这样的一个问题。我自己的经验呢，倒反而是认为知识生产可以从不同的层面来考虑。就一直以来，亚际文化研究整个知识生产还是在一个知识圈子里面的一个知识生产。 它还没有影响到有社会的议题性的东西。那么我自己呢，自从我们从去年开始、前年开始做这个食物主权，那个英文呢是叫 food sovereignty 哈。这个之后，我的感觉就有一些改变。那个时候，我们现在对知识特别渴求，也就是对于我们在中国大陆、包括在香港，包括其实在台湾，我们对于跟食物生产、跟农业、跟农村、跟整个这个非常大的 agrarian change 相关的这个议题，当我们要在内地要这个在话语的论述上面需要斗争的时候，需要讲出我们的看法的时候，其实我们跟别人需要相互连接、相互团结或者相互借鉴的这种需求非常非常大。比如说，我们考虑中国的大豆的生产问题，那么我们其实说为什么我们进口这么多的大豆？中国大豆80%现在靠进口。是的。然后呢，这个进口的大豆从哪里来呢？从美国来，从巴西来，从拉丁美洲来。那我们就想要知道，在拉美这些大豆怎么被生产出来的？为什么是转基因的？那我们比如说，我们在中国进口这么多大豆，我们能不能要求是非转基因的 （non-GMO）？行不行？不行。为什么不行？所以这里面我们就很需要知道这个情况到底是怎么样的。所以我们对知识的渴求，对这个 这种东西 ，international、inter-Asia、intercontinental 这种需求其实非常非常大。我们比如说现在关注转基因的问题，也是我们需要知道，比如说日本他们怎么来处理这个问题。我们需要知道别的国家，非洲怎么来处理这个问题。那我们国家的政策有没有在国际上有没有其他的好的这个可以更好的方法？所以这些东西就是我们一下子进入到社会的议题当中的时候，我们对知识的渴求非常大，所以我们不断的在翻译很多的东西，而且每当一篇新的发现出来，比如说最近是有3万个拉丁美洲的医生要求这个草甘膦，说这个草甘膦要禁止草甘膦使用，那我们就非常非常高兴。因为他们这边的这个发声，对我们这边就非常有帮助，所以这种知识的生产，那么就进入到另外一个，其实是一个运动的层面，进入到一个直接介入到社会的层面。而我认为，当我们到了这个层面的时候，我们可以就把这个动力就产生出来了。所以我觉得是有这样的一个问题。然后呢，我觉得非洲其实给我们提供了一个比较好的一个参照，因为非洲有一个非常好的网站，叫 Pambazuka， 它那个网站是一个泛非洲的一个连接运动、连接知识的一个网站。那么这样的网站，那我们亚洲到现在也没有。所以这样的东西能不能够产生出来？能不能作为这个会议的一种产出？比如说，因为我觉得。就比如说，我们这次谈这个“一带一路”的问题，“一带一路”在非洲，不是说非洲人只有一种看法，可是，在非洲有哪些不同的看法？在拉丁美洲或者在亚洲有哪些不同的看法？那么这些东西为什么不能够体现出来？因为现在整个主流的媒体、主流的知识话语已经。他试图覆盖这些东西。那我们今天讲新万隆的时候，其实我们要提出另外一个知识体系的建构。但这个知识体系的建构，因为如果说真正要产生社会的冲击力的话，它必须要连接到我们当下正在发生的这个事情，我们马上要对他们做出另外的解释。那么，如果这样我们能够做到这些，或者往这个方向努力的话，我觉得这个新万隆作为一种精神，它确实可以走出这个知识圈子。好，
比起我学到的，各种观点看法来，其实我觉得最大的收获是和非洲的、拉丁美洲的和亚洲的，第三世界的兄弟们坐在一起的这种感觉，我觉得这样的一种面对面的交流，对我来说，大概对于我们这里边的大部分人来说，这都是最宝贵的一种经验，因为以后 当我去想象马来西亚、想象非洲的时候，我可以想象这些面孔。这对于一个用文字来工作的人来说，它的意义是非常重大的。因为我觉得那些我没有去过的地方，离我并不遥远。我可以用我的生活经验，用我对我所在的这个社会的各种感觉和责任，去想象他们的，也就是说你们的感觉和责任。所以在这样一个感觉底下呢，我想我简单的谈一下我的收获。当然里边也可能包含某一些想要讨论的问题。那第一个问题，或者说第一个我意识到的一个收获，就是我们这个会议和万隆会议是性质完全不同的会议。当然了，那因为我们是一个纪念万隆会议的会议，但是我们不是和万隆会议在同一个层面讨论同样的问题。我觉得这是非常重要的一个差异。因为万隆会议是一次国家首脑会议，在1955年，国家第3世界的国家代表人民是具有，在整个国际的政治格局里边，它是具有正当性的。但是经过60年，不断的分化、变化、融合和重新的改组，特别是资本的全球化的过程，在今天，国家代表人民这件事情就不是那么单纯了。因为万隆会议要传达的声音是非常相对来说是非常单纯的，是第3世界被压迫、被剥夺的这些国家和社会，他们要求自主的权利，要求在这个不平等的世界上得到尊重。但是今天对我们来说，这个课题已经发生了变化。我们要求的不仅仅是这些，也同样还有这一部分，但是我们要求的是更为实质性的平等。这个是我昨天从 Jomo 的这个讲演里边受到的最大的启发。我从你的这个讲演里边感觉到，也许，这也回应一下海荣刚才谈到的这个问题。也许我们从今以后讨论世界格局的时候，大概我们要暂时搁置资本主义、社会主义、帝国这一类概念，我们去讨论这个社会保护。昨天我觉得Jomo提的特别重要的一个概念在于贫穷饥饿，使得我们关注一个社会有没有保障这个人群的能力。所以社会保护会成为一个我们讨论一个社会的性质的很重要的指标。这是我受到的非常重大的一个启发。也许我们需要寻找新的概念，我们才能面对今天这样的世界。我想这也是海荣说我们要这个不断的我们要去找这个新的知识，除了信息之外，其实还有认识上的新的知识。还有一个问题呢，就是因为我们的讨论不断的出现中国这样的一个主体，我也想作为一个中国人，我对这个问题做一点点的回应。实际上在60年前开万隆会议的时候，对中国来说最重要的问题并不是第3世界问题，而是如何从苏联的掌控下面摆脱出来的这样的一个问题。也就是说，中国仍然在社会主义阵营里面，但是呢，他要试图使自己和苏联保持距离。但是在1955年的时候，中国还没有能力公开的和苏联保持距离。 所以那个时候，毛泽东确定的中国的外交路线叫做，在国际上我们还要坚持向苏联一边倒。因此，这也给外交上带来了很大的麻烦。万隆会议里边包含了很强烈的反帝也反共的色彩，这是中国没有办法在当时认同的第三条道路。因此，中国在60年前加入万隆会议的时候，它面对的是一个非常复杂的状况。那么，中国真的开始有了第三世界，把第三世界作为一个关键的概念来提倡的时候，其实是在1970年代之后。那个时候，中国和美国开始了漫长的建交的谈判，同时苏联和西德建立了外交关系。因此，社会主义阵营和资本主义阵营这样的一个原来很清晰的结构，在这个时候已经变得不那么清晰了。那么，国际政治的多角化在那个时候开始明确地呈现出来的时候，中国需要第三世界的概念。而这个第三世界的概念呢，在这个文化大革命结束之后，中国进入改革开放时期以后呢，它确实有一个时期呢，不再成为一个重要的关键词。但是呢，我不认为它已经消失了，因为在中国社会的历史记忆里边，其实仍然存在着对于第三世界的认同。这是我想强调的这个另外的一个问题。那在这个面向上，确实我们作为中国的知识分子，如何警惕中国丧失掉第三世界的这样的一个思想传统，我觉得这是王晓明教授今天想要强调的一个很重要的课题意识。而我们面对的形势确实很严峻，这是一个问题。那最后一个问题，还有一个刚才有几位都谈到知识分子的定位的问题。我想举一个很简单的例子。昨天许江院长吃午饭的时候讲了这么一件事。他说，就在象山校区，大家都很喜欢这个建筑。象山校区的旁边就住着当地的农民，农民们对这个校区有一句很简洁的评价，说这一片房子好看不好用。许江院长也有一句很精辟的评价，他说农民看问题比我们知识分子清楚得多。其实，在某种意义上，当然我不是诋毁这个象山校区，我很喜欢啊。在某种意义上，这个象山校区象征了我们中国知识分子的位置。那接下来可能我们要有一个问题想和在座的兄弟们共享的，就是其实中国知识分子可能在现实当中发挥的那个能量，远远不及在座的各位。这是我们目前这个历史阶段的一个现象。也许下一个历史阶段会有变化，但是呢，在这一点上，我们之间其实还没有那个平等对话的能力，这是一个现实的状况。所以，我记得有一个很年轻的经济学家，从美国回来之后，他很感触的，这是个中国的经济学家，他说这个我听到这样一个说法：中国改革开放所以成功，是因为中国学家说的经济学家说的所有的话，全都是没有用的，没有被政府采纳。那么在这样的一个状况底下，如何去进行知识生产， 这也是我今天为什么在上午，很想更多的听这个，MAMDANI 教授多谈一谈他的非洲经验的原因，因为我觉得在非洲的那么残酷的斗争现实里边，包括您本人，非洲的思想家们是有能力突破那些简单的表象上的对立，能够走到一个更深入的面对那个问题复杂性的层面。当然，这样的工作大概没法用讨论会的方式来完成。那我希望以后更多的阅读你们的著作。但是总而言之，我觉得这个研讨会提出来的这么多的问题，对于我们生活在中国的这些知识分子来说，我们还需要一些转化，包括那个尼加姆教授，我对您昨天的那个发言非常有兴趣，就是您对资本主义在每一个语境里边的那个具体的变化，它的不同的功能有非常敏锐的分析。我觉得这个给我提供了非常大的启发，因为在今天这样的一个状况里边，其实资本主义的渗透的那个能量是超过我们的想象的，已经不存在一个作为敌人的可以确认辨认的资本主义，它渗透到我们每一个人的生活空间里面。所以在这种情况下，反对资本主义这个说法已经不够用了，因为我们自己资本主义在某种意义上，它已经内化到我们的身体里面。那么我们怎么去进行选择和判断？那还有最后一个问题，是因为万隆会议是一个国家会议，而我们今天在纪念万隆会议，又是一群不那么熟悉的朋友聚在一起的时候，我们很难免用国家为单位来讨论问题。但实际上，到了今天，其实国家的功能，国家和每一个普通人的关系，我觉得已经越来越变得复杂和清楚了。所以国家不是高高在上的首都里边的政府，国家是民众生活里边的一些机制。因此，到哪里去寻找国家，这当然和我最近2年的课题意识有一些关系。到哪里去寻找国家这个问题也变成了一个问题。我不知道，我这算不算是提问题？但是，我觉得这样的一些问题，对我来说呢，是，对今后的这个思考非常有帮助的一些收获。好，谢谢。
谢谢申哥。Mahmood, you want to say something?
Thank you. I asked for the microphone to to respond to the question on Islamic fundamentalism because it hasn't been discussed. But I think I made a reference to forms of nativism. So let me say as sort of an introductory statement that I don't think there's a single general answer, although there are some general comments which can be helpful. But what I want to do is to take a few examples to show that the explanation is different in each case. I'm going to take African examples, right? So if you take, begin with Somalia, right? Al-Shabaab. The Somali case is very specific. The Americans were defeated in Somalia, right? Following that, there was a regime of warlords in different parts of Somalia. The warlords were cleared from most of Somalia by a movement called Union of Islamic Courts. The Union of Islamic Courts introduced rule of law in Somalia, basically conditions for trade, Islamic law, rule of law. That Union of Islamic Courts was overthrown through an American-Ethiopian pact. An invasion of the Ethiopian army, it was overthrown. It is the youth wing of the Union of Islamic Courts, known as Al-Shabaab, which then went into a military campaign, right? And then linked up with Al-Qaeda, linked up with whoever it could link up with. Right? It seems to me that Somalia is in the process of turning into the Haiti of the African continent. It is being punished, right, for defeat of the US. Punished in this sense that what is being said is that there can be no political solution to the Somali question. It has to be a military solution. Now you have this terrible situation in Kenya, right? And the Kenyan government is talking about building a wall, right? Except we know that there's Kenyan army in Somalia. So that wall will have to have a huge gap in it for the Kenyan army to come in and out. But we're getting a terrible security situation throughout Eastern Africa. In Uganda, Al-Shabaab had blown up, right, a couple of years ago. When the suspects were caught, they turned out to be all of them Ugandans. Half of them who had gone with the military into Somalia had been captured there and had joined Al-Shabaab and came back home, right? I take another example, Boko Haram. Boko Haram is a completely different kind of example, right? Boko Haram has had different incarnations. The original Boko Haram was at the beginning of the 20th century. It was in response to the British changing the script of the Hausa language from Arabic to English. And the movement opposed to this, Boko Haram, the book is haram. The book in the Latin script is haram. But that movement died out. This current Boko Haram takes on the name, but is a completely different movement, which arises in the course of electoral competition in northern Nigeria. And it is a militia funded by candidates for governors of provinces in northern Nigeria. And that militia grows, and it's a combination of this elite level competition and tremendous poverty, right? Degrading poverty in Maiduguri and these states around it, right? And the failure of the Nigerian government to address the question politically. But then comes Libya, right? Libya becomes a free-for-all, and there you get training camps, whether it's for Boko Haram, whether it's for northern Mali, whatever. I take one last example. ISIS, South Africa, right? But ISIS, there have been interviews with prisoners of war, and it becomes clear that the core of ISIS, whether it is the petroleum engineers, whether it's the bankers, whether it's the soldiers, the core of ISIS is the Ba'athist state. The Ba'athist state, all of whose personnel were summarily dismissed, right? That's the core of the ISIS state, right? When the Americans introduced a new constitution in Iraq That was a completely sectarian constitution. You could not run for a political office unless you declared yourself Shia or Sunni, because that's the constituency that would vote for you. Right? The Americans insisted on an extremist Shia government which dismissed anybody with a taint of Baathism. Right? This is a product. First, the invasion of Afghanistan, then the invasion of Iraq. Now, the war on terror, and this is the general part of the explanation. What I've said until now is specific, but the general part of the explanation is that the war on terror has demonized the Muslim population globally. But it has had particular consequence in countries where Muslims are a minority. So that any problem, any protest associated with the minority Muslim population is automatically tainted, right? And it is automatically presumed to be unresolvable politically. We have a real problem on our hands, right? This weekend, there's a meeting going on in Addis Ababa, and I was supposed to be there, right? The Tana Forum, and it is addressing this question of whether these issues have to do with some theological side of Islam or whether these are political issues. I should have been there, but I'd already said yes to this, so I came here. But my friends are there, you know, and you know, my views are not solitary in a way. But I think that for Africa, this is a real issue which is, before it grows much bigger, it has to be addressed. Thank you.
Jomo? Yes, if I may just add 2 quick points. Just to give you a sense of the seriousness of the situation in Somalia. For months now, a new situation of mass starvation is likely to take place in Somalia. Okay? Many of us who are old enough remember the Ethiopian famine in the late 1980s. Yeah? Over 300,000 people died. Since then, the single largest famine took place in 2011-2012. 250,000 people died. Depending on who estimates, it's over 200,000 to slightly over 300,000. How many people in this room know about the second famine? Very few. In Somalia, 2011-2012. Why? Because there was early warning. My colleagues were warning from July 2011. Okay, what we call a level 4 warning. Okay, in a situation of uncertain information, level 4 warning is very, very high. Yet, there was no action until July 2012. There were 16 warnings issued, no action. It's not because the warnings were not there. It was because there was a refusal to intervene, ostensibly because somehow or other Al-Shabaab might get some of that food which would be brought in, and so on and so forth. So under various pretexts, and also because of Black Hawk Down, just remember that movie and the imagery in the American mind. So you had a refusal to intervene, okay? And that basically resulted in 250,000 people dying, okay? Now, George Monbiot, who is certainly not, as far as I know, is not a Muslim, has already been talking about this for the last 2 months. And we started issuing the early warning at the end of last year. Until now, there is still no action. We do not know how many people are going to die this time round. And there has been an intervention to prevent all remittances from going back. In 2011, 2012, there was no ban on remittances. This time, the action has already been taken to prevent remittances from going back in. So there are deliberate actions to worsen the situation, and nothing is happening. So I think it's very important to put this in perspective. The largest civil society, the largest Islamic movement in the world happens to be in Indonesia. The leader of that movement became the president of Indonesia. He's dead now. In 1997, there were riots against Chinese. Okay? Why were there riots against Chinese? Because the main collaborators with the military dictator were Chinese. Because just like foreign workers are very vulnerable, ethnically different businessmen are also vulnerable and more easily used. Okay? What did the president of Indonesia, the subsequent president of Indonesia, say? He came out and he declared, I'm also Chinese. Okay? And what is the basis for this? Because over 1,000 years ago, he claims lineage from one of the 11 so-called saints who brought Islam from Guangzhou, from China to Java. You look at him, nobody would dream for a moment he's Chinese. Okay? But this was his claim, and it basically diffused a situation. And finally, my last point is, if you think about the support, the military and intelligence support for the Mujahideen, in a sense, as Chalmers Johnson said, this is blowback. If you think, who created Hamas? Hamas was a creation of the what do you call it? Not the Mossad, what's the other one? Shin Bet. Okay, it was created by the Shin Bet, Israeli intelligence, to weaken the Palestinian national movement at a time when the PLO was rising. Okay, so there's a whole history of this, which I think is very important for us to put into context, because there's a lot of Islamophobia right now, which is exacerbating the situation. But if you look at the recruits for Daesh, or what is sometimes called ISIS, most of the recruits from Daesh now are coming from Muslims and non-Muslims who are alienated in the West. You have the prospect, my daughter has been unemployed for more than 5 years. And there are a lot of other people who are similarly unemployed. Young people have got no prospects for employment in countries like Spain and France and so on and so forth. Many of them are converting. You have a turn to Daesh and this similar phenomenon, partly in response to alienation and frustration. I'm not trying to justify any of this, but I think we have to put many of these things in perspective. Thank you.
I will add like a very short comment in addition to that. Indonesia is, as Professor Jomo has said, a hotbed of Islamic radicalism or political Islam. And I think I do agree, like one of the main reasons for that has nothing to do with theology. It's because, and if you look at the enclaves where these militants are recruited, poverty-stricken areas. So from our perspective, it is partly because the failure of the Indonesian government and the social movement to address these issues. So if you fail to provide an alternative, somebody else will. Yeah, and it happened to be political Islamist groups in this context. And now they're actually migrating to Iraq, to Syria, to the Middle East in large numbers. And this is the major concern that people in the government have right now. So it hasn't stopped, and I think so far we still don't have an effective answer to that.
Yes, I'm not going to address this issue. In Latin America, our problem with fundamentalism is evangelic fundamentalism, which is very, very hostile to women's rights and in many aspects, and market fundamentalism that has caused a lot of suffering by this theological belief that an invisible hand will come in and solve all your problems, which it doesn't. But that's a different kind. I wanted to reply to your question and the notion, and it's very interesting in studying the origin of the concept of third world and third position and so on. When the Cold War started, and Henry Wallace in the United States opposed very strongly, he used the idea of one world in order not to divide between two. But one world, of course, in his concept, meant an expression through the United Nations and so on. It didn't mean, as other people might think, the US dominating the whole of the world. But at this moment, we face a dilemma. Jomo was explaining, for example, how the new development goals are, the decision has been practically made, they should be universal. So it's not like the Millennium Development Goals defining an extreme poverty situation out there and then everybody concentrates out there. It's universal. And there is a lot of talk about the third world doesn't exist anymore because now we have common world problems. And I would say we have to be very cautious about this. Because on the one hand, yes, it is true that there are problems like global warming that are clearly global, universal, and affect us all. But then the responsibility for those problems and the capacities to solve them are not equal. And the formula to address that situation is the principle agreed in Rio 1992 at the Earth Summit, the UN Conference on the Environment and Development, of common but differentiated responsibilities, which is an agreed international principle which says, yes, we are all responsible, but some are more responsible than others. And that's the differentiation, which is very key. Now, what is happening in this moment, this year, we are having these two historic discussions about the new development agenda that is supposed to be decided in September, and in December, the climate conference that is supposed to come out with a climate agreement. And in the name of universality, the Western powers are trying to get rid of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. And they say, but we are all equals now. China, come into the club. You are not part of the third world anymore. You are not developing country anymore. Come into the club and pay. And pay the same as we are going to pay, no matter that we had a history of 200 years creating problems with the climate. So historic responsibilities are gone, colonial responsibilities are gone, and so on. And that's in development terms is now, oh, everybody has to take care of its own development. You are independent, it's post-colonial world, and it's your responsibility. Which sounds very good. Oh, finally they recognize, but it also means you are on your own, you are on your own means, don't look at us for any kind of responsibility. So we have to solve that equation, that paradox, common but differentiated responsibilities doesn't sound as attractive as if we say third world or but this is the very tough international debate currently. And I think we should not dismiss the notion and throw the baby with the bad water.
I was actually avoiding making a comment on the question of political Islam or Islamism and so on, partly because I think inevitably whenever we talk of the non-West, we're always talking ethnicity, religion, and so on, as if that's what we've always been doing. And somehow I want to just rewind back again a little into history to say that the non-West is not simply about Shintoism or Hinduism or Vedanta or Islam or Buddhism and so on. China had its industrial revolution from the Sung dynasty to, by the 1700s, actually China was producing more steel than all of Europe put together. The metallurgical industry, the discovery of the compass and gunpowder and print technology. Arab science has actually had its heyday from the 8th to the 12th, 13th centuries. Yesterday, Mahmood was talking about, or today morning, he was talking about the traditional university in the Al-Azhar and the medieval Islamic universities. The interesting thing is that 13th century, a lot of challenge to the church's authority is actually transmitted through the writings of philosophers like Ibn Rushd from the Arab world by Latin Averroists. In India too, we were not simply doing Vedas and Vedantas. In fact, Indian calculus, Indian mathematics, and so on has had a very long run, and medical sciences and so on. So I want to just sort of move away from this prison house in which we are continuously thrown back into, as if the non-West has always only been about religion, ethnicity, identity, and so on, as if we have had no other traditions. I think we've had very flourishing intellectual, philosophical, rationalist, scientific traditions alongside religion, no worse than medieval Catholicism, for example, right? I think that history is still to be surpassed by the non-West.
请。我想谈一些这个我对于万隆这个事件的一些一些感觉，就是说，其实我可以提一点，就是说中国民众对于万隆会议的一个非常有趣的记忆，就是说所谓的帝国主义对这场会议的干扰和破坏。这里边有一个非常核心的故事，就是说那个一架叫克什米尔公主号的飞机，因为台湾间谍安了这个定时炸弹，然后在从香港飞往印尼的途中，然后坠毁了。而且这个原来这个台湾间谍以为这个周恩来会坐上这架飞机，但结果周恩来从缅甸从仰光那边绕道去了印尼，所以他没有坐这个飞机。但是这个事件其实提供给万隆会议一个非常有趣的背景。然后我们知道那时候朝鲜战争刚刚打完，而且我们知道如果没有朝鲜战争中中国和美国的那种势均力敌，可能万隆会议也不会发生。所以朝鲜战争被认为是一个在解职的历史上很重要的一个事件嘛。所以我觉得万隆会议其实是在两种叙事中构建起来的，就是说第一种叙事就是说中国在当时那个局面中，它与外部世界的关系是。就是说，第一重叙事就是说，它与帝国主义之间那种紧张的关系，就是说帝国主义强敌环伺，然后大家都想对中国进行清剿，这是一重叙事。另一重叙事就是说，通过万隆会议产生那些决议和协定，我们建立起来了一个与第三世界兄弟国家之间的友谊。其实这两种叙事中间，中国似乎找到了一个与外部世界沟通和发生关系的方法，找到了一个安全的位置。然后我进一步联想到，其实，就是法国有个导演叫让·吕·戈达尔，他拍过一个很有趣的片子叫《此处与彼处》。这部片子就是英文名就是 Here There， 就这部电影是1973年拍的。这部电影的背景就是我们大家都知道，戈达尔是一个毛主义者，在70年代。 他受到了当时的 PLO， 就是说所谓的巴勒斯坦解放组织的邀请，去这个巴勒斯坦拍这部电影。当时的背景是他带了几个年轻的同样激进的电影人，然后组织了一个很小的团队，然后去拍摄那些巴勒斯坦游击队的日常生活。但是戈达尔本身对这个所谓的第三世界的革命，虽然他受到第三世界的这个概念的感召，但他对第三世界革命充满了各种自己的预设和想象，所以他安排了很多摆拍的场景，甚至让那些游击队员读那个毛主席语录里面的《论持久战》。然后，当他回到巴黎，他要重新剪辑这个片子的时候，然后那个发生了一个所谓的黑色9月，在巴勒斯坦这样的一个屠杀的事件。他拍摄的所有的，就是在这个纪录片里出现的游击队的成员都死掉了。这个事情给戈达尔一个巨大的冲击，所以他决定用电影的后半部来检讨电影的前半部那些电影的影像中的意识形态的问题。所以这个电影最后成了一个戈达尔对戈达尔的自我批评的电影。那么，其实我想说，就是说。万隆不管是戈达尔的此处与彼处，当然我们可以说他的此处和彼处是巴黎和巴勒斯坦，是第一世界和第三世界之间的此处与彼处。但我们的此处与彼处是第三世界之间的此处与彼处，但是同样都是此处与彼处。我觉得这个里边就有一个很有趣的地方，就是说我们如何建立起一种此处与彼处的关系，在今天，我们如何能提供给这种此处与彼处之间的这种友谊，这种所谓高老师刚才说的国际主义精神，如果还有的话，一种图像和一种叙事，在今天的这种局面下，我前2天在北京的一个美术馆看了一张照片，就是说，那张照片大概是60年代拍摄的，就是毛主席站在中间，然后周围环绕了非常多的亚非拉兄弟，然后毛主席特别开心的在大笑，就说，我们都知道，就是在苏联，就是我们在跟苏联结束那种友好的关系之后，那么中国其实是很想做这个所谓国际共产主义运动的这种教父的角色，所以那张照片其实也反映了这种关系。但我们今天其实建立的友谊或者建立的国际主义的这样的精神的氛围，其实不能是这样的。所以说我比较，或者是跟在座的同学们共同讨论，其实就是说我们如何创造一种叙事和图像，为今天的此处和彼处可以建立一种新的关联。谢谢大家。
It's more a comment, not really a question, but what I want to address is about people's creativity within the ripple of, say, the Bandung conferences. A few years after the Bandung conferences, there was a cultural summit in Singapore. Right, before the merger of Singapore into Malaya during the time. Obviously, an event of cultural bureaucrat, so it's a celebration of the pre-merger era. But precisely is the venue of the event, which is the People's Theater. It's the first theater compared with Indonesia, which have lots of monuments during that time to commemorate the great leader. This People's Theater is founded, donated, constructed by the people of Singapore during that time, multiple regions, multiple races. But what I want to address is, during this discussion, population and popular is constantly be mentioned. It's part of the backbone of the Bandung conferences because people want it. But then where's the people's voices? Where is people's cultural expressions of that? If we move away to 1977, Tricontinental Conferences, what happened during the Tricontinental Conferences is a group of filmmakers, revolutionist filmmakers, decide to go together to have a journal, have a manifesto on third cinema. And what's in the manifesto is how we are going to allow film as a media, allow the voices of the people to be addressed. And this series of events is precisely the ripple of the Bandung conferences. However, what's need to be addressed and need to bring back here, since we are revitalizing the entire spirit of Bandung conferences, is how we're going to carry on and also have the people's voices being addressed. I think it's very crucial, especially when the event is taking places in our school. And all of us, as artists, future artistic practitioner here, how are you going to allow your media mobilized by people, but not mobilize people? This is just a very quick comment. Thank you.
If there is nothing else from the floor, I'm giving the last chance for people sitting here to talk. Huh? Xiaoming, you want? No? Anyone? Oh, Rupert.
Sorry. No, I just want to say thank you, because I'm 68 years old and this is the first time I'm sitting down with people in Asia, a variety of countries in Asia, with very young people also, and I appreciate the last two comments. So it's late in the day for me, but it's early in the day for you. So thank you very much.
What are you saying?
Just one phrase motivated by that last comment about filmmakers and so on. We have been definitely talking a lot about history in these days. In Latin America, there is a common expression that says, winners write history. And some of you know, a week ago, Eduardo Galeano died. Eduardo Galeano was a journalist and writer that did a lot to take into history the voice of the defeated, of the indigenous people, of the poor people, of the simple people. And with the motive of his death, somebody said a wonderful phrase, which was, writers win history. And I think that can apply also to filmmakers and artists and so on.